Hi everyone, I'm Wendy, and today I have 4 whole food plant-based cake recipes in one. That's right, one basic recipe that can be transformed into multiple different flavors. We have your good old-fashioned vanilla cake, a spice cake, a classic chocolate cake, and my personal favorite, chocolate mint, which I swear tastes like a Thin Mint cookie in cake form. I'll put a link below the video with the basic cake recipe and all 4 variations. All of these cakes happen to be low-fat, free from refined sugars, and gluten-free. I eat a diet that's free of added sugars, so I like just a subtle sweetness. Just enough sweetness to satisfy your sweet tooth, but not as sickly sweet as most standard American desserts. But we'll talk later about how you can add a little more sweetness if you like it sweeter. For all of these cakes, we'll need oat flour. I don't ever buy oat flour because it's so simple to make with rolled oats, and it ends up being a lot cheaper that way. All you need is either a high-powered blender or a food processor and some rolled oats. The blender will create a finer texture while the food processor will be a little more coarse, but either one works perfectly well in these recipes. I'm adding 2 cups of rolled oats to my 64-ounce Vitamix container. You want to make sure there's enough volume that it blends, but not so much that you overcrowd it, because it won't blend as uniformly if it's too full. I like to do several batches of this and keep it on hand in these applesauce jars that I've repurposed, but you could use a larger container to keep larger amounts if you bake a lot. Once we have our oat flour, we're ready to make our cakes. So here's the basic recipe. For the dry ingredients, I'm adding 3 cups of my oat flour to a mixing bowl. To that, I'm adding 2 teaspoons of baking soda, 2 teaspoons of vanilla powder, and I do prefer the powder rather than extract. This is the whole vanilla bean that's been ground up, so it doesn't have the alcohol or glycerin that comes with an extract. I think it has a better and richer flavor, but if you do use extract, I would add it to your wet ingredients instead of the dry ingredients. Finally, for the dry ingredients, I have 3 tablespoons of date sugar. In a measuring cup, I'm mixing up the wet ingredients, starting with 3/4 of a cup of applesauce. To that, I'm adding 1/3 of a cup of date syrup. Yes, I'm using both date sugar and syrup. This creates a nice moist texture. If you only use date sugar, the cake's a little dry, and with only syrup, it gets a little gummy. So the mixture creates a better texture that's more similar to a standard cake texture. Then I have 2 tablespoons of regular distilled white vinegar. Another relatively neutral vinegar like rice vinegar or white wine vinegar would work as well. And finally, I'm adding a cup of water. So that's the base recipe for all 4 cake recipes. All you have to do is add a few extra ingredients to transform it into different flavors. For the vanilla cake, I'm simply adding an additional teaspoon of vanilla, and that's it. I'll add the wet ingredients to the dry and mix it completely. The batter does start to bubble as the vinegar and baking soda react, so I like to gently mix it to try to keep some of those bubbles, but I do want all of the ingredients to be fully incorporated. Otherwise, you'll have little clumps of flour through your cake. Then I'm adding this to a 9x9 silicone pan, or you could use a parchment-lined 9x9 dish. We'll talk about baking and frosting a little later, but now let's move on to our spice cake. You start with the same base recipe that I showed you before. Then to the dry ingredients, I'm adding 2 tablespoons of pumpkin pie spice. Once again, mix up the wet and dry ingredients, and for this one, I'm baking it in a muffin pan. Make sure you use parchment muffin cups or a silicone pan like this. Since we don't have any oil, these cakes will stick to your pan. So now our cakes are ready to bake at 350 degrees for 20 to 30 minutes. The cupcakes will cook in about 20 to 25 minutes, while the cake will take longer. The cake is done when the top bounces back if you gently touch it. If it feels gooey, it's not quite ready yet. Be sure to check on it towards the end because if you overcook it, it might get a little dry. After your cake is baked, you'll want to let this cool. If you're using silicone like I am, it helps to let the cakes cool completely before trying to remove them. When it's still warm, pieces might stick, but once it's cool, it comes out easily. So while those are cooling, I'll make some frosting in my food processor. My secret ingredient for this whole food plant-based frosting is beans. I'm using 1 can of chickpeas and 1 can of Great Northern beans that I've drained and rinsed. You could use all white beans, but I wouldn't recommend all chickpeas because it would have a grittier texture. Next, I'm adding about 8 to 10 medjool dates, or about a cup's worth. And I've soaked those in a cup of soy milk. You can use any kind of plant milk. And for our vanilla cake frosting, I add 1 to 2 teaspoons of vanilla and blend that up. I don't like a super sickly sweet frosting like I did when I was a kid, so this frosting is just sweet enough for me. But if you need it to be sweeter, simply add more dates. You can also add a little more plant milk or water if needed to help blend the extra dates. Then I'm going to transfer about half of this to a container, and I'm adding a teaspoon of my pumpkin spice for the spice cake. Again, I'll blend that to mix the spice in and transfer it to another container. And then these 2 cakes are done. I recommend waiting to frost it until you're ready to serve. So if you're serving a crowd, feel free to frost the whole cake, but if you're only eating a piece at a time, I recommend frosting it right when you're ready to eat. So now let's move on to the chocolate cakes. Once again, start with the same basic recipe. Then for my classic chocolate cake, to the dry ingredients, I'm adding 6 tablespoons of carob powder, but you could also use cocoa or cacao. I like to stir the dry ingredients first to fully incorporate the chocolate. And then once again, add the wet ingredients and gently fold it in until everything is mixed well. As I mentioned at the beginning, these cakes are sweet but not extremely sweet. You could play around with how much date syrup and date sugar you add. However, you may need to adjust the amount of water to get a similar texture. I'm not a fancy pastry chef, but in my opinion, whole food plant-based desserts tend to be more rustic anyway, and they usually turn out pretty good no matter what you do. So I say try it according to the recipe the first time, but then play around in the kitchen a little bit and have some fun making it your own. Once again, I added this to my 9x9 silicone pan and baked it for about 30 minutes. And finally, we have my favorite, chocolate mint cake. We start with the basic recipe and once again add 6 tablespoons of carob or cocoa. Then to the wet ingredients, you can add about a teaspoon of peppermint extract. This stuff can be pretty potent, so go easy on it and adjust based on how strong your particular extract is. This smells so delicious you'll probably want to eat the batter while you're mixing it. But once again, I'm making cupcakes and I'll bake it for about 20 minutes. As with the other cakes, I'll make some frosting while the cakes cool. The chocolate frosting starts with 2 cans of black beans that I've drained and rinsed. Again, I have about a cup of dates that have been soaking in a cup of soy milk. I'm adding a teaspoon of vanilla and 6 tablespoons of carob powder. As before, you can use cocoa if you prefer. I'm blending that up until it's nice and smooth, and again, I'll transfer about half of this into a container, and then I'm adding just a little bit of peppermint extract to the rest. Once again, frost your cakes just before serving and enjoy. And use your creativity. I've got all the cakes with their matching icing, vanilla with vanilla, spice with spice, and so on. But you could mix and match. Have chocolate cake with vanilla frosting, or vice versa. And if you want to get really creative, use the basic cake recipe and change up the flavors completely to make up your own cakes. Let me know in the comments which flavor do you want to try first. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.